Community Engagement Librarian Sustainability at Hobsons Bay Libraries, and I'd like to welcome you to the EnviroCentre event tonight. I might just stop sharing my screen so you can see who's talking to you for a moment. I would like to begin by acknowledging that depending on where you join me from tonight, we're potentially gathered on the traditional lands of many peoples. From my home in where I am, I'm joining you from the lands of the Wurundjeri, and I'd like to pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. However, I don't want to forget about the people of the Kulin Nation who cover the Hobsons Bay City Council area, and where many of you are probably joining us from tonight, but also not excluding all traditional owners whose lands we may be communally standing on this evening. Now, Council acknowledges that long before this area was known as Hobsons Bay, our First Nations people had named its places. It had hosted ancient ceremonies where learning flourished, where knowledge and resources were exchanged, and healthy communities and relationships were sustained and adapted to the changing environments. We recognise the unique role that diverse Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from many lands have played and continue to play in the life of our city. We pay homage to that this evening, coming together to learn, to share, to sustain and to adapt. So just a little bit of housekeeping for tonight's event. The recording will be available online for people to see afterwards. So if you don't want your camera on, just remember to turn that camera off. And as I've said, we're going to mute people, but when you want to ask a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself. There is a chat function or a question function. So if you do have a question and you feel like you don't want to interrupt at that exact moment, pop your question down. And then when I feel like it's a good time, I will ask Rachel and Munira to that there's a question, and then I'll ask you to unmute yourself and jump on and ask that question. It's always nice if the questions come directly from the people who've asked it. However, if you don't feel comfortable, if you've got lots of noise in the background and you don't want to ask your question yourself, just let me know that in the chat as well, and I'll ask the question for you. So this event tonight is being brought to you by Hobsons Bay Libraries and the EnviroCentre. I did just want to give you a little bit of an update. Obviously, restrictions have changed in the last couple of days. And while we're figuring out what that means for the libraries and we're getting clarification from the state government, our library return shoots did close this afternoon. And they will be closed until further notice. And that also means that our book delivery that we've been doing is on hold again until we get clarification around that one. So keep an eye out on our social media and we will update that as soon as we have any information for you. Tonight's event, though, is why we're all here. The topic of ethical investments is one which is gathering attention at the moment, and I thought it was a timely addition into our event calendar. With current world events, people are rethinking their impacts on the planet, and that includes where they place their money. Can be a minefield of information out there, though. So today we are joined by Rachel and Munira from Market Forces, who can help us sort through some of that information. They come to us today from Market Forces, who believe that those who have custody of our money should use it to protect, not damage our environment. Can you please join me in welcoming Rachel and Munira?
Thanks so much. Thank you, Melissa. Thanks so much for having us. Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Ooh. Can people see that screen? The presentation?
Yes. I can see that perfectly. Thanks, Rachel.
Great. Okay. I'm going to be facing the presentation, but I'll turn back to face you all. But if I'm looking away, it's because I'm looking at the presentation. So I would also like to start this presentation by acknowledging that wherever we are, we're on First Nations land. So I am also here on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and also say that, you know, there can be no environmental justice without First Nations justice. And really just want to, you know, have a shout out to all First Nations warriors around the country that are, you know, doing so much to protect country, often at personal cost to themselves. So just wanting to start with that. I'll just, oh, there you go. Great. Is my second slide worked okay?
Yep, all good.
Perfect. Okay. So just a little bit about Market Forces. My name is Rachel and I am the Shareholder Action Campaigner and the Super Fund Campaigner at Market Forces. And Munira, I'll just get you to introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Munira. I'm the analyst for Market Forces. So I do research work and a bit of activism.
And basically, Market Forces was set up 7 years ago by Julian Vincent, who had worked at Greenpeace for 6 years. And during that time, he found that the campaigns that were most successful were campaigns that stopped financing. So, if a coal, oil and gas project doesn't get finance from banks or insurers, then it's unable to go ahead. And I think one campaign that many of you may know, the Adani campaign, even though it's still going ahead, it's a really good example that this coal mine in Queensland hasn't been able to be built for 10 years because so many financial institutions have not allowed it, have not given it funding. So that's kind of where we are and what we do. And yeah, our whole mission is to stop finance to coal, oil and gas companies and try and transition to a low carbon economy. So economy that is consistent with, a safe climate. So just an agenda of what we're going to go through tonight. Munira is going to cover what ethical investments are, and she's going to cover some of the bank's work that we do, and then there's a space for question and answer time. I'm going to cover insurance, and then there's a space for question and answers. I'll talk a bit about our shareholder work, and then there's another space for question and answers. And then Munira will cover the super funds in general. I'll talk a little bit about some of the specific work we're doing on super, and we'll have final Q&A time. But we really want this to be interesting for you all and interactive. So please make the most of question and answer time. And if there isn't something that we've covered that you want more information about, we're happy to provide you with that information or link you up with other people that can provide that information. All right, so I'll throw to Munira to cover what is ethical investment.
Thank you, Rachel. Just as Rach, I have two different screens, so if I'm looking away, I'm not actually looking away from everyone else. I'm just looking at a different screen. All right, let's talk about ethical investments and what they mean. Ethical investments, also known as socially responsible investment, is the practice of investing in companies whose business is not considered harmful for our society or for the environment. It is a way of aligning an individual's ethical values. It takes into account the investor's personal values, be it social, moral, political, or environmental values. So before someone goes ahead and makes an investment, they think about these factors. So ethical investments avoid investing money in activities that are considered harmful, and examples range from fossil fuels, tobacco, gambling, weapons, unfair labor practices, and the list can go on and on, depending on what each individual's ethical values are. And this is done through a process called negative screening, which means when an individual can pick and select investments that cause harm to the environment and society and choose not to put their money in these harmful industries. So instead, what people do is use their money for good by investing in companies that have a positive environmental and social impact. And more recently, ethical investments are called sustainable investments. And this is because it aims to bring about positive changes in society while considering financial returns. And recent studies have also shown that there are positive relations between a company's environmental, social, and governance characteristics and their financial performance. So what this means is that if a company is good at managing its environmental, social, and governance issues, more likely in the longer term, it will have better financial health. And ethical investment is for individuals who care about our planet, who care about issues such as climate change, environmental protection, human rights, gender equality, and such. So what ethical investments allow us to do is stay true to our values, put our money where our beliefs and our values are in. So a very simple example of ethical investment would be excluding investments in coal, oil, and gas, basically fossil fuel companies that are fueling climate change. And our work at Market Forces is predominantly around environmental and climate change issues. So today we will talk through how you can align your money with your values in a few different ways. And we will also tell you about ways to find out about if your money is being invested in harmful businesses like fossil fuels. So one really important thing to note is that at Market Forces, we're really trying to change corporations and their behavior and ensure that their business practices are also aligned to people's ethical values. So as an environmental advocacy group, we're not only encouraging you all to make ethical choices, we're also pushing for the corporations to that we campaign on to do the same. So let's start off by watching a short video on who we are and what we do. Rach?
I can't share the sound on my screen, so I'm going to stop sharing and Munira will share this.
Sounds good. Here we go. Can everyone see a YouTube screen?
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll play the video now.
I can't hear the sound, Munira.
Sorry.
So if you stop sharing your screen.
Yep.
And then share again and click that little box.
Right.
And now we'll try again.
Thanks, Melissa.
It was a manic Monday in the financial markets.
In negative territory, Woodside Patrol.
Concerned about Australia's level of debt.
The doomsday scenarios are back.
We're told about market forces as if it's some kind of invisible, supernatural power, impacting our daily lives but beyond our capacity to influence.
So behind all of the graphs and tables, commodity prices, exchange rates and market fluctuations are people. Markets are built on communities. They only exist because of all of us, the work that we do, the services we provide, and the choices we make. Market forces are the sum total of all of our decisions about what we buy, sell, support, avoid, where we put our money and to whom we deny our money. The problem is that all too often we don't make choices. Instead, we allow the banks and superannuation funds that are supposed to be looking after our money to choose where to invest it. We allow governments to spend our tax dollars in a way that suits their political backers more than the public interest. The economy is full of big companies who will donate, advertise and lobby their way towards maximising their profits, often at the expense of planet and people. We're here to counter those voices with those of people who want their money used in a way that supports the environment and community, not damaging it. Market forces is the bank customer who publicly closes their account and moves to a bank that won't fund dirty fossil fuel projects. It's active community members engaging with company staff to change the company's behaviour. It's shareholders who make sure that the companies they own are well managed and well governed and have business strategies that are aligned with keeping global warming under control. It's citizens who vote for and challenge governments to use our tax dollars to support activities that benefit the community and penalise activities that harm it. That is us. That is market forces. By acting together, our campaigns have shifted billions of dollars, helping thousands of people align their own money with their personal values and sending powerful signals to companies about how they need to change in the process. Dozens of financial institutions have responded to people raising their voices by introducing policies that reduce or eliminate investments in dirty fossil fuels. We've shown what's possible. Now we need to step that up. We're battling some of the most urgent environmental issues humanity has ever faced. Now more than ever, we need people to stand up and tell companies, financial institutions and governments that it is not okay to spend our money on environmental destruction. We can make sure that the governments and financial institutions that are lucky enough to have custody of our money use it in a way that supports environmental and societal protection. All we need is you.
Thanks, Munira. I'll share my screen again. Can you see the presentation again? Great. Oh, you're just on mute, Munira.
Thanks, Rach. Hope you all enjoyed that video and got a gist of the kind of work that we do. And so today we'll focus on the most of our campaign areas and start off by talking how we can manage the situation we have at hand right now with the global climate crisis, and how we can demand from different financial institutions to stop their support for fossil fuel companies. So let's start by looking at a few things that the fossil fuel company would need in order to operate successfully. The first one is debt, which is borrowing from banks in the form of loans and other ways. And the second one is insurance to secure their assets. And the third one, which is really important, is investors. If a fossil fuel company is financed by its investors, it has the means to continue operating its business. So moving on to the next slide, we'll start by talking about banks, and specifically the big four banks in Australia. A lot of us most likely are bank with the big four banks, and from our research, we have found that the big four banks of Australia, ANZ, Commonwealth Bank, NAB, and Westpac, are massive supporters of the fossil fuel industry. And since 2016 till the end of 2019, as the data presents here, they've lent out huge amounts of money to the fossil fuel industry. And the sad thing is that all four banks have made commitments, climate commitments. They have all made commitments to the Paris Agreement, which aims to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And our research reveals that the big four banks have what we would say a mockery of their own commitments to climate change. Together, all the big four banks have loaned $35.5 billion to the dirty coal, oil, and gas industry, which is just a huge amount of money, and it helps all these companies to continue their operation, to keep doing things in a business as usual manner. And what we see here is that the big four banks are still backing these companies, even after all these commitments they've made around climate, around the Paris Agreement. And we've also noticed that they continue to support the coal industry. They continue to give out loans and debt to companies like Whitehaven Coal and New Hope, which are all pure play coal companies. And in some cases, we've also found that maybe the banks may be breaching their own policies. So in the sense that they've made all these commitments about climate action and supporting the Paris Agreement, but at the same time, when we see the data, we find that they're still supporting the fossil fuel industry. So if we look at the graph here, as I've mentioned before, all the big four banks have given away $35.5 billion to fossil fuels, and in comparison, a really small amount to renewable energy, just $12.6 billion. And if we look at ANZ, it's given away more than $10 billion to the fossil fuel industry, and in comparison, just about $2 billion to the renewables industry. And if Commonwealth Bank, as you all can see, is the highest lender to the fossil fuel industry. It's given away more than $12 billion. And in comparison, the renewables lending is so small. It's about just over $3 billion. And in comparison to all Big Four, NAB seems to be doing a little better than its peers in terms of renewable lending. It's given away more than $5 billion to renewables, and in comparison, about $7 billion to the fossil fuel industry. And one really interesting thing is just to look at the comparison between how much money they've given to fossil fuel companies and how much money they've given to renewable energy. And if you see the ratio at the bottom here, we'll see that Commonwealth Bank, for every dollar that they've given to renewable sector, they've given $3.7 to the fossil fuel industry. And this ratio is the largest for NZ. For every dollar that they've given to the renewable sector, they've given about $5.5 to the fossil fuel sector. So it's kind of shocking that the Big Four banks, they have all these big statements about going green and supporting our future through climate action and things like that, but they just adamantly, they continue to support the fossil fuel industry. So with this situation at hand, we want our banks to take certain actions, and that would sort of help us ensure that they don't continue supporting the fossil fuel industry anymore. And we have a few very simple demands from these Big Four banks. And some of them are, the first one is no lending to new fossil fuel projects. Really simple and straightforward ask, given the situation we're in with climate change and rising temperatures. And the second one is no lending to companies that are supporting these fossil fuel projects. And the third one would be phase out exposure to thermal coal by 2030. And this specific ask is really interesting because it's based on scientific research that shows that coal must be phased out from developing countries by the year 2030 in order for us to have a safe climate future, in order for us to limit global warming to a safe level. And the final one is, the fourth and final one is set out oil and gas exposure phase out dates in line with keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees. So very similar to the third ask, which is about coal. And this one is about oil and gas, because what we've seen is that the trend is nowadays that, oh, no, we're not involved in coal anymore, but hush hush about oil and gas. Not much is being, not much commitment we're not getting much commitment from the banks on oil and gas, which is still a dirty fossil fuel and still damaging our environment. And this ask is just so important to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And for example, here in Australia, we've seen the devastating impacts of rising temperatures. Half of the Great Barrier Reef corals died in back-to-back mass bleaching events due to rising temperatures. And earlier this year, we also the entire Australia burn. We saw the worst bushfires on record. And the latest science is very evident. It's very clear that 1.5 degrees is so important, and limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees is so important. And it means the world for us to try our level best to put our efforts in and try and do that. And if we move on to the next slide, we can have a look at what these Big Four banks have done so far. We talked about the commitments or the demands we're making from banks or the actions that we want them to take. They're very simple asks. And when we look at this chart here, it's a bit frustrating, as you can all see that in corresponding each of the questions, most of the answers are no, which means that our Big Four banks have not made these commitments. So for example, if we look at the first one, plans to exit thermal coal by 2030, consistent with the Paris Agreement. Only Commonwealth Bank and Westpac have made these commitments, and NZ and NAB are behind. They have not made any commitment like that. And moving on to the second question, again, whether these banks have plans to phase out all fossil fuels in line with the Paris Agreement. Again, all answers are no. Third one, rules out funding of new fossil fuel projects. Again, it's a no. So this sort of paints a picture on how the big four banks are doing and what the situation we have at hand. They're just continuing to support the fossil fuel industry. And at this point, we don't have a commitment or we're not sure that they will not support the fossil fuel industry. They still can do it with the policies that they have at this moment. So moving on to the next slide. The question is, how can we make the banks stop their support for the fossil fuel industry? And at Market Forces, we can probably say, as you saw in the video, that we have helped push bank policies through pressure from communities, through pressure from bank customers, through internal pressure, and many conversations with the banks themselves. And we've also managed to move billions of dollars out of fossil fuels in the last 6 or 7 years. And in order to stop these activities, we needed the support of the bank customers, the general public, shareholders. And we've run public-facing campaigns in order to do that. And again, as I was just talking about it, the massive issue of climate change is here. It's present today in Australia. And there's just no excuse for our major banks to continue fueling these fires. And there's just absolutely no excuse for the banks to keep lending to industries that are causing these fires, that are fueling the climate issues. So there are, it's not all like dark and bleak. There are a few things that we can all do as people who or individuals who have bank accounts. There are a few things you can do. The first one would be have a look on our website. There's a table which we call the banks comparison table, and see where your bank stands. Have a look at how your bank is doing in terms of fossil fuels and their involvement with fossil fuels. This would sort of help you find out which banks do and don't, or which bank is faring better in terms of lending to fossil fuels than others. And that way you can just have a comparison and have a look at all. We have a list of about 120 banks and financial institutions. So it's a huge list, and we've done our research to look up how they have performed so far. So go ahead and have a look at the comparison table. We really encourage you. That would be really great for you to just make a decision on what to do next and where to put your money. And
I'll just put that in the chat so that people can copy that link if they want to go there.
Thank you, Rach. And the second point the second thing you can do is, if you are banking with one of the big four banks, you can put them on notice. What this means is that you can tell your bank that if they continue to choose fossil fuels, you'll choose another bank. It's this too is really easy. You can do it while sitting at your home, on your computer, through our website. It's just a simple form that you fill in, and it will automatically send the letter to your bank or the message to your bank that you are putting them on notice. If they continue to support the fossil fuel industry, you just go ahead and choose another bank, take your money out of it. And the third one, which I was coming to, is divestment. What this means is that once you've put your bank on notice and you're not satisfied with their performance or their policy announcement, and they're still continuing to be involved with the fossil fuel industry, as a customer, you have the power to make a huge difference. as a customer, you can put your bank on notice first and then actually choose to take your money out and put your money or invest your money into another bank that possibly doesn't invest in fossil fuels. So you can divest your money and move your money to the bank that is essentially more aligned to your ethical values. This too is really easy, few simple steps. Have a look on the website. Rachel, I believe, shared the link. Even if you're not doing it now, have a look later after this call and skim through our website. There's so many options and so many things you can do just sitting at your computer. Especially with the COVID situation right now, we can't actually physically be at our bank branches. So there's heaps of things you can do today, now, tomorrow, while being at home. I think that's all for banks from me. I would like to open it up to questions if anyone has one.
We have a question from Rowena. Did you want to unmute yourself and jump in and ask your question, Rowena?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Rowena.
Sorry, it's a bit, I've got kids here, so it's probably a bit annoying. My question, which I put in the chat, was about what local councils can do. Hobson's Bay have declared a climate emergency, and they've been asked to change their procurement policy to rule out working with companies involved in fossil fuel projects or new fossil fuel projects. So I'm just wondering if you think that's an effective thing for councils to do, and if other councils are doing this successfully, and what else local councils can do at their level.
It's such a good question. Munira, do you want to answer that, or are you happy for me to?
Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay, great. So I think it sounds like an excellent thing for councils to do. And I know this was done a fair bit in the Adani campaign. And it's a real brand damaging exercise for companies. So if companies feel like they're losing customers and shareholders and councils over something, they're more likely to rule it out. So I definitely think it is a useful tool. Rowena, if you like, I know that my colleague Pablo, our colleague Pablo was working on some councillors for this divestment strategy for banks and other campaigns. I'm really happy to put you in touch because he'd have some more specific information and maybe be able to give you a bit of a list of the other councils that are doing that.
Okay, thanks. That would be great. I will try and work out how to send you my contact details.
I'll put my email in the chat, and if you just want to copy my email and send me an email, then I can link you up.
Great, thank you.
And that was the only question that we've got so far. If anybody else has one, feel free to raise your hand now. No, that's just your email, Rachel. Any other questions? Then we might continue on, but feel free to pop any of those down in the chat. I'm keeping track of them as they come up. So.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for that, Munira, and thanks everyone for your for that. I'm going to have a chat about insurers. So, more and more insurers are ditching coal. Insurers are really important for coal mines and oil and gas, and for a lot of things to get off the ground, because companies need insurance. If they don't have insurance, they're much less likely to go ahead. And so you can see from this, I'm still sharing my screen, right? You can still see the screen? Yeah, perfect. You can see from this picture, more and more insurers internationally have actually been ruling out coal. And that's very much been thanks to a global effort and a global push to push insurers out of coal. In a way, it is very hypocritical for insurers to invest in coal in the first place. So here's a picture of a campaign that we worked on with QBE. But if you think about it, I mean, after the bushfire crisis, insurers had to pay a lot of damage from this climate-related crisis in terms of housing and everything else, yet they're kind of insuring the very industries that are causing the climate crisis. So it's a real hypocrisy, and it's something that we can really push them on. Last year, customers, shareholders, community members ran a campaign on QBE. QBE is one of the biggest insurers in Australia, and they provided insurance for coal, oil and gas projects. And after a big campaign, thanks to lots of people doing different things, QBE ruled out insuring thermal coal, which is a huge win, and makes it a lot harder for new coal mines to be developed in Australia. So that was, I mean, I think that shows that community power works. So that was really exciting. And yeah, this is a photo. Some volunteers went and handed out donuts to staff members at QBE to show that they received a 0 on their climate action policy. So, but it was quite a fun action, and I think you know, something that we really see in Market Forces is you know, people that work for these companies are really good allies. So they often want what you want, a safe future for all of us, and they can do a lot of great work pushing internally for things as well. So it's like a big collective push for these outcomes. So what do we want insurers to do? We want them to rule out insuring any new oil and gas projects. So Munira talked about the dangers of oil and gas. And so, you know, that's what we want them to do to ensure we stick to a stable climate. Insurers also have money that they're kind of investing in other companies as well. And so we want them to stop investing in fossil fuel assets. So it's kind of like a bank in a way. They take your money for insurance and then they'll spend it on other things. And so we want them to stop spending it on that. And we also think it's really important that they advocate and educate customers about the effects of climate change and how that will affect insurance premiums. So there are some areas of Australia that are it's impossible to get insurance because of climate risk impact. So you know, from fires or from floods and that kind of thing. And we don't think it's fair that those folks that bought those houses weren't educated around that. And we think the insurance companies have a role to play in that. Did anyone have any, I mean, that was quite short. And in terms of like what you can do on insurance, we have a insurance page as well that I can put in the chat. But if you are an insurance customer and you want to get involved, feel free to get in touch with us. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about insurance?
There's no questions in the chat at the moment, Rachel. So unless anyone wants to pop something in. I am, just to let you know, as I'm popping some links to some books that we have in the catalogue around ethical investments as well. So if you wanted to copy those ones down, obviously some of them are physical books, but the next one I'm about to pop is an ebook as well, so it's still available even when the library's closed. But I just thought I'd let you know that. But yeah, no questions in there, so you can continue on for now.
That is so useful. Thanks so much, Melissa. Okay, great. So I'll talk now about the shareholder action work that we do at Market Forces. Are there any insurance companies doing well? Good question. Yeah, great question, Mick. So, I mean, IAG doesn't insure coal, oil or gas, but they still invest in coal, oil and gas. Suncorp is about to release a report, is about to release their policy. So Suncorp and QBE, after pressure from customers, they both said they wouldn't keep insuring coal last year, and Suncorp is about to release a policy on that. So watch this space. Suncorp could be leading the pack, but it depends on their policy. Munira, is there anything that I've missed there that you?
No, it sounds good. Do have a look on our website as well for updates, or on our social media.
Do you have the link to the insurance page that we can chuck in the chat, Munira?
I'll do that while you're speaking, Rich.
Thanks so much. Perfect. Okay, so shareholder action. I mean, so it's a funny thing, right? Because on the one hand, we're saying that it's good to divest from companies that you don't agree with, but shareholders, I mean, I guess if you are a shareholder, you own a portion of the company. However, it also gives you the opportunity to try and change the company from the inside. And it's one of the reasons we were able to get QBE and Suncorp to divest from coal was a whole lot of action from community members and also from shareholders as well. So one of the and also being a shareholder enables you the opportunity to speak directly to the CEO and board of the company at the annual general meeting, which is a meeting that all companies, all publicly listed companies have. So basically what we do at Market Forces is we help empower shareholders. So just say you're a shareholder in Commonwealth Bank, but you are not happy with Commonwealth Bank's climate policy. We can help you actually attend the Commonwealth Bank annual general meeting and speak directly to the board and CEO about like why you're not happy with their policies and how they can change their policies. So that's really quite powerful. We can also, if you're not available on that day, we can ask someone to attend on your behalf. And this has been very powerful to ensure that community members can attend annual general meetings. So for example, last year, and you'll see in the photo down the bottom here, Origin Energy is a pretty big energy company. They are trying to frack the Northern Territory. So they're using unconventional gas methods in the Northern Territory. And the traditional owners there don't want this to happen. And they've been asking Origin Energy for a long time to not do this. And Origin Energy haven't been listening to them. So thanks to shareholders, we were actually able to, and like the incredible work from Larissa, who's the First Nations Justice Coordinator at GetUp. She organised, there was about 20 traditional owners from the Northern Territory that took a bus from the Northern Territory to Sydney to actually speak to the board and CEO of Origin, and which was really quite powerful. And it was shareholders that enabled us to do that. So if you have shares in a company and you want to try and shift that company, we can work with you to try and do that. And yeah, that's one of my jobs all year round. So Munira, if you could chuck in the chat the shareholder link, that would be great. So if anyone does have shareholders and is interested in that particular area, yeah, you can sign up and let us know which companies you have shares in. And then we'll get in contact with you if we're having any actions related to that company. So I thought, given it's COVID and we're obviously doing things a little bit differently, I thought it was worth having a COVID slide about what's going on at the moment. Whereas last year it was very, very normal to have 200 people packed in a room, and that was seen as a not even seen as an odd thing. They would never do that, especially not in Victoria at the moment. So annual general meetings have all been moved online. It does, there's some benefits and some costs for that. But basically, some companies have been trying to avoid questions by having it online, and they can obviously state, they can not answer people's questions because there's a chat box and everything. But on the flip side, it has been really useful at ensuring community members can ask questions. So there was a Macquarie Bank annual general meeting last week, and there's a community in Texas, in the USA, that are upset because Macquarie are financing a gas project there. And they were actually able to call in to that annual general meeting and ask questions, which was really cool. So yeah, it's still happening, this kind of attending annual general meetings and pushing companies. It's just in the online space at the moment. And while technically, legally in Australia, you can't have annual general meetings online, that's been waived through this COVID time. So that's been waived until March next year. Did anyone have any questions about the shareholder work or anything shareholder related or anything that's come up at all? All right, I'll keep going then. And I'll throw to Munira to talk about super.
Thank you, Rachel. If anyone has any questions, do type them in. We will respond towards the end of the session if you have questions related to insurance or shareholder action or banks. Let's talk about super. So here in Australia, superannuation contributions are mandatory. And the intention of us putting away money as super is basically for us to retire with a greater level of comfort and security. So we know that we have those savings, kept aside for our safe future, and which means that today the super industry is massive. It's huge in size. It is estimated that it is worth roughly about $3 trillion. And what this means is that when we put our money away as super, that money is invested into companies. And superannuation in Australia owns or funds roughly 40% of stocks in the Australian Stock Exchange, which means these super funds are putting away our money, which we are setting aside as super, and using that money to invest in Australian Stock Exchange listed companies. So moving on to the next slide. Since the superannuation funds are using our money to invest in these companies, we should know what kind of future they are funding, or we should know what our future savings are being used for. What is that money being invested in? And the sad reality is that many of Australia's superannuation funds are actually invested in dirty fossil fuel companies. This means that the money that we are setting aside from our income to secure our future as super could actually be invested in companies causing environmental destruction. So most of our super funds are invested in companies like Santos, like Woodside, like Origin Energy that Rachel just mentioned, in companies like Whitehaven, which is a pure play coal company, and many other fossil fuel companies. And the surprising thing is that a lot of us are actually not aware about where our super money is being invested in. And because of this reason, because we, as Market Forces, we work around finance. So we started doing research. We started campaigning for super funds to divest from damaging, environmentally destructive industries like coal, oil, and gas. And if you go on to this link at a later time, we will help you make sure that your retirement isn't funding environmental destruction. And if you get onto this page, we provided the link here. You can see which super funds are invested in companies that are blocking climate action, and you can also see which ones are free of fossil fuels. So have a look at this page at a later time, and see how your super fund is doing, whether your super savings are being used to invest in these dirty companies.
And I've put that in the chat as well, if people want to copy and paste that link.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And if we move on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about these specific companies that are really, really hampering our progress in combating climate change. So what we did was identify all these companies that our super funds are invested in, and the same companies that are leading to environmental damage. So these companies are pursuing new fossil fuel projects or planning to expand their fossil fuel business, or which translates to failure of the Paris Agreement. And what they do is use our retirement savings to do that. And these companies, as we have called this research report, out of line, out of time. That's what we're calling them. They are completely out of line, they're out of time. They're using our money to expand the fossil fuel industry, which is not okay. So at the start of this year, we did a research and found that the biggest super funds in Australia have over 175 billion of our general public's retirement savings invested in these big 22 out of line, out of time companies, which are mostly fossil fuel companies. And what this essentially means for us is that if our super fund owns shares in these companies, so do we. And most commonly, unknowingly, like most of us don't actually know that our super funds are being invested in these dirty fossil fuel companies. So again, visit this page, have a look. We have a form there as well, similar to the banks, where you can tell your super fund to ditch these climate wrecking companies. And really, these are our savings. These are funds that we are putting aside for our future. We have the power to tell our super fund managers that we don't want our money in fossil fuel companies, and really hold them accountable and make them act ethically in a way that is aligned to our values. So yeah, it's totally up to super fund members. They have the power to do this. They have the power to tell their super that they don't want their money in fossil fuels. They have the power to tell them that this is how we want our money to be managed. We don't want it in dirty fossil fuels. Maybe instead we want them to be invested in renewables or climate solutions, things like that. And Rachel will now tell us a bit more about our specific campaigns around super funds, which is really fun.
Thanks so much, Munira. And Jen, I can see that you've put the article in the chat, which is really exciting. And I'll speak a little bit to that as well. Unless you wanted to speak to it, Jen? No, okay. Well, there'll be question time at the end of this too.
No, Rachel, I was just finding my my mouse. Yeah, I'm with Unisuper at a university, and I just signed a petition. There was a petition, and I think you guys were actually involved in it, weren't you? Which is why you're talking about it.
Yeah.
And it just showed that it can work. So it was good.
Good work, Jen.
Awesome, great work, Jen. Thank you. Couldn't be winning this campaign without you. So really, really awesome that you're on the call. So as Jen was saying, basically at the start of this year, Market Forces launched a specific campaign on university super. And we did this because there were quite a lot of university members that contacted us and were saying, hey, we're not comfortable that 10% of our fund is invested in fossil fuels. Can you run a campaign on it? And so we said, okay, sure. And so we launched this campaign. folks like Jen and others signed up to this open letter that was calling on Unisuper to divest from fossil fuels. And then we also had some really fun actions. So this photo here is a whole lot of academics and students that went to this event called the Australia Universities Conference. It was a conference that was sponsored by Unisuper, and the day that this happened, we had a full-page ad in the Australian Financial Review calling on Unisuper to divest from fossil fuels. So that was one of the things we did. And then yesterday, so this is hot off the press, but Unisuper has actually sold out of their coal shares in Australia. So they tried to do this without telling anyone. They tried to do this sneakily, but we kind of caught wind of it and tipped off a journalist, and she followed up. So that was really good. So I think like this was really exciting because obviously we still have a bit to go on campaigning on Unisuper to stop investing in oil and gas. But I think it shows that actually collectively, like Jen was one of 12,000 people that signed on to this open letter. And there were different actions calling on Unisuper to divest, and people followed up with board members and other people. But I think it really shows that yeah, thanks, Colin, that this stuff can make a difference. Just to say as well that Unisuper is not the only super fund that has divested from coal this year. So Healthy Futures, another campaigning organisation that works with health members, has pushed HESTA and First State Super out of coal as well. So that happened quite recently. And the super fund industry is interesting because they're kind of like dominoes. They don't like to be the first one to do something, but they also don't want to be the last one to do something. So I think you'll see more and more of these types of moves when member pressure pushes their fund to do it, because they don't want to be the first one, but they also don't want to be the last one. And I quite like this post from Healthy Futures that they posted. It was saying like, here's a lesson in hope. Back in February, super funds dug in their heels and claimed they weren't even considering fossil fuel divestment. Just a few months later, HESTA and First State quit coal, and then a few weeks after that, Unisuper has. I mean, they haven't got a policy, so we want them to have a policy, but it's unlikely they're going to continue reinvest when they've already divested. So I think it really goes to show that people power does make a difference. And Unisuper is an interesting one, and this might apply to other people. I mean, one thing to do is to divest, take your money away, but a lot of people actually can't choose their fund and they're stuck in Unisuper. So in that case, it's really important to actually push your fund out of fossil fuels. Great. So that's it for our presentation. We've just got some Q&A time here if you like, and there's our Facebook, Twitter, and website for people to check out.
Well, Rachel and Munira, thank you for that. That was so much information in there. So thank you also for sharing those links. I think they'll be very useful for some follow-up research, I'm sure, for myself and our participants tonight. Please feel free, if you do have a question, to raise your hand or pop it in the chat. There isn't anything in there just yet, but I do want to give you the opportunity, if you do have any questions, to make sure that you have time and we don't cut you off as you're typing your question. So I've just seen some thank yous for the presentation. Some more thank yous to Rachel and Munira for their great presentation. It's certainly given me food for thought, and I think that's a very Absolutely. It's the thing about presentations like this is that sometimes it's just that little bit of information to kind of push you towards going down that path and finding out that information that's out there. So thank you very much for that. But if there aren't any questions, we've got lots of people saying thank you in the chat.
Munira, did you want to go through? Oh, sorry, Melissa.
No, go for it, Rachel.
Did you want to go through how to navigate the website?
Yep, happy to. Just a second. I will share my screen.
Great. I'll unshare then.
Yep. Are we on the Market Forces website?
You are indeed, Munira.
Fantastic. So this is just the homepage of our website. If you can see marketforces.org.au, there's heaps of information out here, and you can scroll through the menu bar here. And under campaigns, if you just bring your mouse, scroll your mouse onto campaigns, we've got all the topics that we talked about today: banks, super, insurance, shareholder action. So just click on each of the links and have a read through. One thing that's really important that Rach and I would like you all to know is that we do not provide financial advice. So we would never tell you which banks to choose or which insurer to choose. We provide you with all the information available through our research and through our work for you to make the best informed decision for yourself. So have a look through. Here's the shareholder section where you can just tick whether you have shares with these companies so that you can use your power as a shareholder to voice your concerns at the AGMs. Also give voice to other members, like community members, on the ground folks that are being impacted by these big oil and gas projects, and people who don't want these big fossil fuel projects in their area that's damaging their lands, that's damaging their farmlands, their homes. So have a look on our website when you have the time, please. It will be really great. We would love your support. And if any of you are interested to donate, here's the donate button. If you would like to get involved with us, volunteer with us, there's also a section here under get involved. So yeah, we just urge everyone to have a look through and see what's best for you.
Thanks, Munira.
Thank you for that. I have a question that I think our attendees might get some use from. We often find people who come to these events are in the whole spectrum of just starting out to get information all the way through to already knowing what's going on and have a good understanding. If somebody in the audience today just wants to change one thing tonight, would you suggest it super or the banks or insurance? Like, what do you think would be the first thing to go to?
Oh, such a good and hard question. Can I defer it to you, Munira? What do you think?
That's a really tough one, and just as I mentioned now, it's really individual preferences and what people feel they're ready for. If they feel they're ready for changing their super funds and roll over to a different one that is more ethical, they can do that. I think it's really up to individuals. If you're frustrated with your bank service and the way your bank has behaved in the past, and you know the big four banks in Australia, they just don't support fossil fuels. There's so many other controversies around them. It could be that you're just frustrated with your bank's behavior and you want to switch right away or put them on notice and then switch. I think it's a tough one to tell, and there's also a lot of shareholders in Australia who are very active in voting and resolutions, things like that. So they may want to get involved with shareholder activism as well. So I honestly can't tell, but I would be a bit biased towards shareholder activism because that's how I started my work with Market Forces.
What a great and very diplomatic answer there. I guess a good thing though would be for everyone to jump on board and just have a look at what the status is of their banks and their superannuation and things like that, and at least, as you said, put them on notice and let them know that, you know, if they are invested in fossil fuels, that you're not happy about it. So that would be a good place to start. Now I'm just seeing. Oh no, go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well, that, you know, maybe you're in a situation where you can write to your bank and tell them, but you can't divest at the time, or, you know, you can write to your super fund, but you don't want to divest. And so you can do that as well. Like, there are lots of different ways of getting involved, and it doesn't necessarily mean shifting your money, though that is one great thing you can do. We just recommend that if you do decide to go through the process of shifting your superannuation or your bank or your insurer, that you actually let your bank know, and try and make as much fuss as possible. So, like, you know, if you're on social media, post on social media, tag us in social media, tag the bank, you know, because it's that fuss that actually gets results. When they start seeing that people are doing it and there's a bit of a fuss made, they'll start thinking, oh, okay, we're going to be losing customers if we're investing in this. Maybe we should stop doing it, if that makes sense.
And
yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Munira.
May I also add that for super funds, sometimes there are different options, and sometimes the ethical options are faring better than the standard option that we get by default. When I first opened my super account, I had no idea that I could choose where I want my money. And like years later, I learned about it, and then I chose the ethical option. So there's many options out there, even within. If you feel you cannot change your super fund, there are a few options. So have a look and make what's the best decision for yourself.
Yeah, that's some really great advice there. I was just thinking, on top of Rachel's comment, telling the bank or the insurance company or the superannuation why you're leaving, but also telling your friends and your family why you're switching as well. So having that conversation with people, because that's, I think, our biggest power is to let other people know that are in our circle.
Yeah, and I'd say on that, like, and Jen, you might add to this too. I mean, that's how we got the numbers for Unisuper. We don't have 12,000 Unisuper members on our list. I think we had 600 actually. But it was people at different universities telling their friends, and then them telling their friends, and it was this big snowballing event, and it was really great. I think we were, you know, Unisuper Divest was trending on Twitter for a few days because different people were like tagging their friends and posting on Twitter, and it works, you know, it really works.
And one of the most beautiful things about telling your story is that you show your power as a bank customer or as a super fund member. That's just so beautiful, and I think that's one of the biggest inspirations for our work as well, just individuals practicing their power.
So we do just have a comment more so than a question from Liz, and that's about whether the presentation is likely to be posted on the library website, as Liz would like to share it and spread the word. So we will absolutely be sharing it on Hobsons Bay Library's YouTube channel, and we'll pop a link in the Facebook event. And so I'll get it out to you. May not happen tomorrow, but hopefully by the end of the week I will get that up there. So that will be there. So please absolutely share it with your friends and family. Let's get the word out there. If there isn't any last questions, we might, or even if anyone just wants to make a comment about anything that's been said today as well, Rachel's just popped her and Munira's emails in the chat as well. So feel free to take them down and follow up with either of them if you do have any further questions. But other than that, the other thing I did want to do before we finish up and say goodbye is just highlight our next EnviroCentre event, which is coming up next month. It's on Wednesday the 9th of September. It's going to be online again, and it's all about good bugs and bad bugs in your garden. So we know lockdown has sent a lot of people out into the gardens, and people are furiously growing edible foods, which is awesome. But we also know that people have been thwarted by bugs in the garden. So this is about all the good ones that you want to encourage and all the bad bugs and how you might be able to discourage them. So come along to that one. That one's on our website and ready to book into. And October, I have just confirmed that we have Tyson Porter coming in. So he was originally going to be our March event, and we closed the library back in the first lockdown, mere days before he was to join us. So we've rebooked him in. So he's the author of the amazing book Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Change the World. So come along to that one as well. That one's not up on the website, but it will be very shortly by the end of the week. But other than that, thank you, Rachel and Munira, for an amazing presentation. Thank you for your time tonight and being so generous with the information that you have shared. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's event. If you haven't found out about the event through our library e-newsletter, I would suggest jumping on the e-newsletter. It comes out once a month, and it just gives you a list of all the library events that are coming up. So it's a really good place to find out what's coming. I'll see there's a few more thank yous coming up in the chat. But other than that, thank you for your time. Stay safe out there. Stay at home as much as you can, and we'll see you on the other side.
Thank you so much, Melissa.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for organising. Thanks everyone for coming.
Bye. Thank you for your time.
Bye.
I'm just going to pop a slide up just as we're letting people leave. It will have some information, just some links to some of our, when I get it there, just going to pop that up there, some of our Facebook, our Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and if you did want to get in touch, our library email. But other than that, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.